This week, we're discussing Luther's understanding of the two kingdoms. And this is the idea that God is the king and ruler of all creation, both heaven and earth, both his spiritual kingdom, which we experience in the church, and his earthly kingdom, which we experience in the secular world. And as Christians, we're citizens of both kingdoms. But the way God demonstrates his authority over these two kingdoms is very different. In the earthly kingdom, he rules through the vocations of those who are in positions of secular power. In other words, through those who make and enforce our laws. Or, as Luther put it back in his day, he rules his earthly kingdom through those who wield the sword and maintain public safety through the means of force. By contrast, God rules his spiritual kingdom in a very different way. He rules not by power, but rather by love, the gracious and sacrificial love which Christ demonstrated for us on the cross. And so as Christians, we live with one foot in each of these two kingdoms, and we recognize that in the earthly kingdom, we are subject to the earthly rulers and authorities, while in the spiritual kingdom, we are subject to Christ and must obey his command to take up our own cross and follow him.
Welcome back, everyone. You've had some time to read another chapter, and this week we're talking about one that maybe was something new to you, the idea of living in two kingdoms, one being sacred, the other one being secular, the one that is the earth and the one that is heavenly.
I would just say to kind of summarize what you said as well, there was a quote there that I had written down that refers to today. It says, the problem of how to live a spiritual life in the midst of an unspiritual world is one of the most vexing dilemmas in the Christian life. And all the paradoxes that you were giving kind of summarizes all of that, of everything that we're going through. Because there's just a lot of conflicts, and we try to solve those things, perhaps. But we do need to try to distinguish between the law and gospel.
Absolutely. And live in those two realms.
Right.
Exactly. Right? Go ahead, Caleb.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know. When I was reading the chapters, I tried to find connections to the chapters. And so, the first chapter, which admittedly was a lot easier for me to stomach than this one. This chapter is tough, and it was challenging just because as I self-reflected, because the reality is there's a lot of temptations in our world, in the secular world, if you will.
He offered different ways that we react to this conflict, and he talked about as Christians, do we want to try to change the culture? That's one thing that we can do. Do we want to try to change the world? So we take some of our Christian beliefs and politically go out and try to change society. Or the other interesting one was, do we withdraw in reference to other religions, the Amish in particular, where we just go kind of hide away. But in the end, he tries to, I believe, help us to how we can manage to be Christians and live in society, as you referenced earlier, the difference to the two kingdoms. That was the challenge for us, I think.
How can we be in the world but not of the world?
This reminded me when I read this about being of the world. It was probably 5 or 6 years ago, and there was a brand new show out there of, it's a dancing competition. And I remember sitting on the couch with Madison, and she loved seeing all the different dancing. And then she finally stopped and looked at me. She's like, why do they have to be half naked or not wearing clothes? And I thought to myself, here I am letting myself and my daughter see of the world, and to this day we still don't watch it, only because that was just not something that I wanted her to see of the world. And so much of this, to halftime shows, to Oscar awards, it's just of the world. And is it something acceptable? And I think that's where you have to personally find your balance as to, what is acceptable to you. And this was a good reminder to me of things that I am of the world, that I need to be more conscious of.
I think it's a great point, too, because we don't have to change our religious views based upon what's happening in the world. We don't have to adapt our Christianity to the latest and greatest ways of worshiping. Other ways we have our faith. In fact, this talks about going down to our traditions and where we have been and how we can continue to do that in this world, but still adapt.
Kind of along those same lines, one thing that I wrote down as something from this chapter that really stuck with me was imposing your religion on others goes against the gospel. I've been in situations where I feel like it has been, somebody has been trying to impose, be it their religion or maybe even not religion, but their beliefs on you. And so, I don't know, that was something that kind of stuck with me as I read through this chapter.
Right.
I think it's important that we do realize that we can present our faith, but we can't impose it upon others.
Right.
So it's our witnessing, but not our law that now you gotta do what I said. We have to keep that idea that the church's priority is the gospel.
Right.
But we can't get out of the world.
Right. We can't get out of the world.
We still have to, can't enforce the law. That's not our main calling. But we have to live by it.
Right. Right.
And I think, how many times do we have something happen to us in our life and we're like, why God? Why did this happen, God? And I'm now because of this chapter, putting it into perspective of, why God? Why did this person die? Why did this person get a disease? Or why is there bullying? Why? We all want answers in this world. And what this helped remind me of is the why is God wants me to run to Him. He wants me to go to Him. He wants me to trust Him. And that is the different, the earthly to the heavenly, as I just have to trust that, God has this, and that's my why. Why I might never ever have answers, but that's my why.
That's right. And to stay close to Him, to know what your why is. What do you think it means when He's talked that we need to be in spiritual balance?
I kind of have it in this book, a little section that it's kind of like having your feet in both. And how that's done, I don't have that balance, so I'm not a good one to say. I'm striving for that, but just to have, to be in the Word, to be surrounded by other Christians, to, have that faith, but then also still being in a worldly that we live in, to just go about your day and to, follow the Word. I think it's tough. Sometimes I've never done this, but I think I'm doing the split sometime because I want to be in this one and I want to be in this one.
Right.
And it's a constant, I think, battle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know that I have the answer to your question, but I reinforce what I had read. One of the quotations was that says that problems come when the two kingdoms are confused with each other. When the church functions like the culture, then the culture functions like the church. So that just reinforces what you said. Unfortunately, I don't know how we get that balance.
I think so. Kind of to go off what you guys said, we had this guide, as we read through, and I, took notes. And something I put down that really challenged me was, if I can read my chicken scratch here.
Sure.
The idea of the church and culture clashing and kind of who should challenge who. And so, yeah, I don't know. As I hit on earlier, this whole chapter to me was really challenging because that idea is tough of, like you're doing the splits. Which world are you in? So,
Right.
I think just underlying that both kingdoms are under God's rule. And that's something that I always think about the spiritual as God running that, but I don't think of the earthly kingdom as much. And I've grown through this chapter to figure out that this is God's way of ruling, or at least giving us the tools or the people to help doing that. And there are differences in how those goals are achieved.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's well put. That's one of the notes I had, because he does emphasize that the earthly kingdom is under the law and the spiritual kingdom is under the gospel. And we need to differentiate between those two. But then at the end, he also says Christians are citizens of both kingdoms. So we need how to live in both, which is the challenge. The one other comment that I think you might have mentioned, whether it was on camera or off camera, that I still struggle with it. How often, and you may have mentioned it earlier, how often do we have a catastrophic event and everyone says, why would God let that happen? And as he says, even those who do not believe in God remains under his rule and care. So, he does, is responsible for all, even though we ask ourselves sometimes why.
Right, absolutely.
That's still puzzling. Yes. The book also points out, he was quoting, it says, Luther describes the condition of the ordinary person of humble occupation, who knows where he stands in both kingdoms. And he goes on to say, as long as he references shoemaker, blacksmith, any ordinary person, clings to these two, to the word of faith toward God, by which the heart is made clean, and to the word of understanding, which teaches him how to act toward his neighbor in his station in life. Everything is clean to him, even if with this hand and his whole body he deals with nothing but dirt. So that's what stuck to me as our everyday spirituality.
That is a great culmination of what we've been talking here this week as far as the two kingdoms. Thank you for that.